And with that, friends, we welcome you back into another edition of OGP Live on a Wednesday, where I am Adam Armbrecht flying solo as Andy Makowitz enjoys a little much deserved respite, vacation time, as they say. We're coming to you directly live through YouTube. This will, of course, go out as a podcast later today. But if you're joining us, it'll be a slightly different look because we don't have the usual bells and whistles up that we would when we go through StreamYard. That being said, there's a few things we want to cover here. Obviously, later today, we're going to get the official schedule release for the New York Football Giants for the NFL as a whole, and we'll know where these opponents are going to fall into place. But there's some things that we can glean ahead of it, including we have even maybe a possible leak around the schedule, so we'll touch on that as well. But the first thing, maybe Giants related and league related to a good friend of the New York Football Giants and Tom Brady, is Sterling Shepard is going to be one of the players. Recently the NFL announced they're going to remove the restrictions on numbers and what players can wear. Sterling Shepard has been number 87 since he started his career in the NFL. He'll be going back to his college days, going back to the number that his father, who also played, wore as well, and that's number 3. So the question you have to ask is, one, how does that resonate with people? Because I think usually, even at the college level, guys wear lower numbers, especially at the wide receiver position. But I always associate the low ones, even at college, with guys that are the quick, twitchy ones. So it's going to be interesting to look at Sterling Shepard and think, well, that's different. That's a different look for you. Maybe he'll look faster. Maybe he'll feel faster. Maybe he'll feel quicker. And it makes me wonder what could happen with Kadarius Toney as well. Obviously, single-digit number himself in college. Will he stick with that, or will he potentially make a move to a different number altogether? I wouldn't mind seeing him kind of like in a double, 11, straight line. Watch out. It doesn't really go along with his name. Quick twitchiness. I don't know what the proper tag would be. I don't know how you'd want to apply that to a Kadarius Toney, but it'll be interesting to see. The funny thing to me is that if you remember going back to when this was first announced, there was that conversation about Tom Brady, right? He came out and said, well, this is no good. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about switching things from the way they've been. I spent my whole career looking across the line. And people said, you look across to the defense and you see a certain grouping of players and numbers, and you understand. I'm calling out the Mike linebacker. I'm looking across there for guys in the 50s. So I understand who could be potentially coming from where. Now, my real question is, though, if Tom Brady looks out to the side, what if he runs a quick slant pattern and it's to Mike Evans and he's now wearing number 2? Is he not going to throw it to him because he gets confused that might be a kicker or a punter potentially? Because the number grouping suggests that this is not a guy you want the football in the hands of. So it'll be interesting. Listen, Tom Brady's won a handful of Super Bowls. I think he'll be okay, but I'll be curious to see how some of these teams go and really how many players, right? Saquon Barkley put it out on social media asking, I wonder what's going to happen here. Is there a number that fans think I should switch to? And people threw out some ones. I did the double deuce 2-2, but I don't think he's going to switch necessarily. He said that he likes his number that he's had. But how many players will we see make switches like this? Are defensive players inclined to move away from what they've done to start their careers? I feel like wide receiver maybe is that position that personality expression is a part of that role in the NFL. We know that the diva tag is not a stranger to the wide receiver position. So maybe you see more guys in that vein go with numbers that they like, that they've been comfortable with, maybe that they always wanted. So we'll see. Footnote as well, Sterling Shepard has to buy that number or compensate Mike Glennon for it. They say that's always what happens, right? That if you're going to take a number from a teammate, you'll compensate him in some way. It's a couple things, though. Mike Glennon just got here. So I don't know how much you should have to compensate him. And then 2, your backup quarterback. If you hear that Sterling Shepard wants the number, private message to Mike Glennon, just give him the number. I'm sure he'll do something right by it because Sterling Shepard is a heck of a guy. But if it comes down to he just doesn't have the cash on him, go ahead and trust that he's good for it and get that number over to one Sterling Shepard. The other thing, the big thing, the main reason that we're here today, of course, is that later tonight, I think they're going to do it as a primetime event because everything that the NFL does is a primetime event. And that's get into the schedule release for the New York Football Giants. And we know the opponents. And there's a couple of things that are interesting. So I don't know if it's eighth or ninth easiest schedule, supposedly, that the Giants are going to face based on the opponent's records from the year prior. And we know this kind of stuff. But the first thing that's funny is that they say, well, eighth or ninth easiest. And you go, really? Because I'm looking at the schedule right now and I'm seeing that I've got obviously the divisional games, but I'm also going to have the Kansas City Chiefs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to have the Dolphins thrown in as our 17th game. I'm even going to get the Chargers, who were a quality team at the end of last season. I'm going to get the Raiders, the Rams now with Matthew Stafford. So, and even the Atlanta Falcons. And some of those teams I just mentioned there at the end are the reason why this stuff gets so skewed and is relatively non-functional information at this point right now. Atlanta Falcons, okay, bad record last year, but not a bad offensive team. And certainly if they improve even marginally on the defensive side of the ball, that's a shootout game potentially. Maybe if you're a Giants fan, you say, defense, let's get after them, and we can hopefully have a game that we're up 10, 13 points and going away from. Hard to have that thought process, by the way. We'll get into it in a second here as well. Some other information I was looking up when you think about how many points the Giants put up last year to say, let's be up by 13. Well, the Giants didn't put up a lot of points, receivers, both through free agency and the draft. But Atlanta, bad record, not a terrible team. When you talk about a team like the LA Chargers, okay, rookie quarterback, but getting better, strong defense there. You talk about the Rams. I mean, decent team last year, added Matthew Stafford. That's an improvement over Goff. You talk about even teams like inside the division. Obviously, that's the big spot where it's going to skew it when you have only the Washington football team with a respectable quote unquote record, but you got a 6-win team in Dallas. You know that they're going to be closer to 10-6 than 6-10. The Eagles may be bad, but they're still divisional games. And then you think about the Denver Broncos, the Seattle Seahawks. These are teams that actually the Giants won't get the Seahawks, as I'm getting ahead of myself with some of the schedules and where home and aways are going to fall for these teams. But all these games, right? It depends. If you get Chicago at the end of the year and Justin Fields is now playing, how much better do they maybe look? They had a rough season last year. So, marking your schedule difficulty or ranking it based on the records from last year ahead of a free agency class and ahead of a draft is just, take it for what it's worth, grain of salt, but there's not a lot that you're really going to feel confident about gaining from that other than to say, yes, these are the teams we'll be home for. These are the teams that we'll be away for. Incidentally, this is the other piece that I wanted to touch on. We had said, going back to the last couple of episodes, that the New York Football Giants, when you look in the division, what's going to happen, right? What's going to be the case as far as expectations for who should win the division? And then we went into the Vegas odds and saying, hey, listen, that's about getting betting. And we get that, getting money on the line there. But what is interesting to note, when you go home and away here, so for example, the Giants and the Cowboys have the common away opponents, meaning both the Giants and the Cowboys will be on the road for Kansas City, on the road for Tampa Bay, on the road for the Saints. Also in a common opponent on the road for the LA Chargers. So you're talking about, of course, going out to the West Coast for that particular matchup. The games where they're different, the Cowboys will go on the road to face New England as their extra game. They'll also go to Minnesota for the Vikings. We'll have Miami. We'll also have the Chicago Bears. And then, of course, the divisional games. But having to go on the road, even for a team that we think maybe could take a little step back, have some regression without Drew Brees there, which is a dangerous proposition when you have Sean Payton. But if you think that you're going to have to go to New Orleans as opposed to having them come to you, it's going to change what that line looks like and be interesting, right? We always say 3 points. That's about what you're getting for a home team. So if you're going down to New Orleans and it's a +4 matchup for the Giants, well, that means it's almost even money if you're at home. So, the reason why it feels like that's relevant, the Washington football team will be home for the Kansas City Chiefs, home for the Chargers, home for the Saints, home for the Buccaneers. Incidentally, they'll also be home for the Seattle Seahawks, their outside opponent that they're going to have going from West to East Coast. So another little bit of a benefit for the Washington football team. Now, their away schedule, we can maybe say, Falcons, again, it could be a difficult matchup potentially, but I don't think anyone is scared to go play in Atlanta. Now, the Buffalo game, that's a nice one to get them on the road for, certainly. They also have Carolina, Denver, Mile High, okay, the Packers, and then the Raiders. Packers is a nice one if Aaron Rodgers is still on the team. If they traded Aaron Rodgers, then at that point, it gets a little bit trickier and you start to wonder, what is that potentially going to look like? But I think I'd rather, obviously, Denver Broncos, the Giants will have them at home. So maybe that's a nice, you don't have to go to the altitude. But that's where I think if you're just saying on its surface, all the common opponents, Tampa Bay does get a nice leg up because they avoid travel to the West Coast with Seattle, and then they get all of some of the best teams that you're going to potentially face, mainly the two Super Bowl competitors in the Chiefs and the Bucks are both going to be in your building. That's nice. Maybe if you get Tom Brady later in the season, it's a colder weather game for him. That could be a benefit to the Washington football team. On the benefit side, maybe for the Giants, likewise, you can say Atlanta, indoor team. Obviously, if you get them coming out to the East Coast, that could be nice later in the year. Denver Broncos, not really much of a win or a loss there. They're outside. And then you talk about the Raiders, maybe. The nice one would be the Rams because they'll be coming from the East Coast to the West. But I do think inside the division, the teams that have the biggest benefits are Washington and then Philadelphia based on who will come to them versus where they have to travel to. And you may think that Philadelphia is just a footnote inside of this division. But again, if they can win one surprising game here or there, it's going to make all the difference. Now, the fact that they got unlucky in being the worst team in the division, and we'll see the 49ers, that's one of their home games, that's where they get kicked a little bit below the belt because it feels like you were a bad team, you're trying to rebuild, and now you'll go out there and have to face a team that only through injury found itself where it did by the end of the year. So that's a good one. That's a feather in the cap. But away games that Philadelphia is going to have, like the Jets, for example, is a nice one for them. Like the Detroit Lions is a nice one for them. So there's winnable games, and this is how I think this division starts to come back to the middle a little bit. And I wonder how far out maybe Washington can get some of those key games. If the Cowboys or our New York Football Giants can get on the road and grab one of those wins, sure. But when you're a bad team like Philly and you're going to play a rebuilding Jets team, a bad Detroit Lions team, a hit or miss Atlanta Falcons team, high offense, bad defense, etc. Well, all of a sudden you at least give yourself a puncher's chance. And then their home games, those are difficult, but they are home games. And that's where you feel like, again, you get a little bit of a leg up there. So maybe the Eagles are there, unless 17 games now, 6 wins, looking at 7 wins maybe. And it's all in that spectrum of possibility. Is 7, would 8 and 9 be insane for them? I think so. 7 and 10, and those wins can impact how things look for the divisional games as well, obviously. So we'll keep an eye on it, but later today it'll officially come out. There was some rumor I thought I had saw from, from Art, who's a Giants beat writer, talking about the Denver game. But I thought he said on the road for Denver, but that's a home game for the New York Football Giants. So we won't get an official reveal there. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see how it comes up as the New York Football Giants get into it. The other thing that we were talking about over the last few days was the New York Football Giants and kind of expectations for this team. When you go inside of it, what up, Ricardo? How are you, sir? I know it's yes. Listen, and this is where we'll get the live. There we go. We'll tilt it up that way. As I said at the top, doing this in a little bit different construct, though. Yes, that sounds good, right? The sound is good. The look, the aesthetics aren't the best, but different setup today. Not running it through StreamYard, so the visual is a little bit wider and the microphone is a little bit funnier. But that being the case, one of the things that we were talking about in the last few days is, of course, looking at the NFL, the NFL stats, and saying, what are the expectations for the Giants in the upcoming season? How far can you move the needle? Now, there's a few interesting ones that I thought were worth taking a look at. Now we know. So earlier when I said Giants be up 10 or 13 points against a team like the Falcons, who has a good offense but doesn't have a great defense, you stop them a couple times with some of your shutdown secondary, and then you get yourself out to a bit of a lead. The funny thing for me was, though, when you go inside the numbers, I want to get these up in front of me here. Remember, the Giants were a team that scored under 18 points a game last season offensively and scored or gave up rather, just over 22 points a game. So listen, year to year, with the way player movement is, free agency, etc., you know that obviously it's nothing set in stone what you did last year to what you could do in the upcoming season. But I got to say, it is discouraging to think all we need to do is score. One commentator said, if the Giants can score 23, 24 points a game, I think they'll be in a good spot this year. Okay. But that's a whole nother touchdown. Now, unlike 2 years ago, you go back 2 years, and remember the Giants were putting rookie season for Daniel Jones. The Giants were putting a lot of window dressing on some of the games, if you recall. Late in games being down 14, getting a touchdown to lose by 7, right? Or being down by even say 13 or being down by 10 and getting a touchdown late to make it a 3-point game, but literally with seconds on the clock. Last year, the big benefit that I think we saw, or the big growth that we saw, and this is hard to find a silver lining in various times, but when you take a look at going from a team that was in the red zone against the Rams through an interception, right? You can go back and take a look at the Buccaneers. There's a handful of games this past season where when you go back and look at them, you realize we actually were there to score the game lead taking score. God, that was talk about a sentence that doesn't come out the right way. To go ahead in the game, the opportunity was there. So you can look at 3 or 4 opportunities this past season and feel like they are right there in front of us. Now, a lot of this, as Ricardo's pointing out, is going to come down to Daniel Jones and saying, yes, he will find himself on this team. I believe he will. And it's going to look drastically different when you get into the red zone and you think about, now we have Kenny Golladay. Now we also have a new weapon in Kadarius Toney, a rookie weapon. We also have a veteran weapon in Kyle Rudolph. So all of these things are going to give every opportunity for those things last year, where, by the way, dealing with injuries throughout the roster, dealing with a guy who has a case of the can't catchies in Evan Ingram. Now, all of a sudden, you can pivot away from them. You can look at the myriad of other weapons and also look at the opportunities a guy like Sterling Shepard's going to be afforded in the red zone when every other attention is being paid to these other more dangerous red zone weapons. So I think that that's going to open things up. It makes it promising in saying, how do we get from 18 points a game to mid-20s? How do we effectively score, on average, another touchdown per game? And that also means scoring another, this year, 17 more touchdowns per year, right? So adding 17 to 20 touchdowns to a team, to an offense, is not an easy overnight fix. And yet, when you go back and look at Daniel Jones and his touchdown to interception ratio, you'd like to think that all of those numbers are right there to be had. It's just about moving the ball a little more effectively and making a couple of better decisions when it comes to the red zone. So we'll take a look at how that unfolds for Daniel Jones early in this season. But statistically, when you go back into it and you look at some of the numbers, the Giants, here's the reason why you can get excited about it and why adding another top flight cornerback, while even going into the draft and getting a couple more, while going to the draft and getting Azeez Ojulari is a nice one. Adoree Jackson, obviously in free agency, even a later round pick on Ellerson Smith. It's why returning Leonard Williams on the big contract is important as well. When you go inside the numbers on the offensive side of the ball, the promising thing that you can look at, I should say on the defensive side of the ball, the promising thing you can think about is that this is a team that was giving up 4 scores per game, an average of 3 touchdowns and a field goal. The defense should be able to bring that number down closer to 20 than 24. And I can get bullish and say maybe even a little bit lower. But remember, some of the matchups that we're going to see over the course of this season are going to be difficult ones. The in-division ones with Dak Prescott back fully healthy for the Dallas Cowboys and all of the weapons that they have. It's going to be a tough matchup. Even Ryan Fitzpatrick in Washington, in spite of his up and down style of play, they've got a lot of weapons there now. Went into the draft and one of my boys, Dami Brown. They brought in Samuel in the offseason. They already had a player like Gibson in the backfield. So there's a lot of talent on that team. Now, am I that scared of Ryan Fitzpatrick? No. But there's still going to be games that you're going to have to go out and score some points in. But I think this defense is going to be set up and better suited to have some of those shutdown drives. And now all of a sudden, You bring down what the defense is putting the bar at here in terms of points surrendered each and every game, and then you also elevate what we're doing offensively. Yardage wise is what I also wanted to get into here. Think about the fact that from a yardage standpoint, when we get into it here, passing yards per game. I mean, you could take a wild guess about where the New York Football Giants fell on this one, but you may be surprised. No, you're not going to be. I was just joking. 208 yards per game. 208 passing yards per game. That is in the same ballpark as the Cincinnati Bengals, who lost Joe Burrow, and who were behind, by the way. They had 215, and ahead of the Philadelphia Eagles, 189, who played without anything at all, essentially, on that roster last season and threw a rookie quarterback into the mix. The Patriots, who were doing nothing but running the ball, even with their quarterback, the Jets, and the Ravens, the only teams behind us. And by the way, when you talk about a team like the Ravens and you say 171 passing yards, good Lord, yeah, 192 rushing yards per game. The New York Football Giants in the rushing attack, 110 per game. So, this, I think, when you talk about the reservations from the outside looking in about, oh, the Giants, look what all they've added, you still do need the proof to come. Because this is still a team that's only averaging, under 300 yards per game. Just over, but barely over 300 yards per game. So there's big areas of improvement to be made here. The other piece, obviously, is the points, and I just wanted to confirm where that stood. 17.5 points per game, only team behind them, the one that shares the same stadium with us, the New York Football Jets. 19, 19, 20, and 20 for the Jaguars, the Bengals, the Broncos, and the Patriots. We've made a lot of moves. This isn't to dissuade anybody about what's going to happen, but it is just to say it's going to be a seismic shift this year in terms of the stat lines that this offense puts out. It has to be a seismic shift in order to see the results that we're hoping for. And I think a lot of outsiders are going to look at the team and say it's the offensive line play. That's where the big concern is. And listen, a lot of Giants fans have said that. We went back to the draft and thought they were going to, maybe suggested that they should be looking to take an offensive lineman somewhere in the early rounds. The balance here, I think, is that, again, and we said this, if you look at the offensive line and you feel pretty good about it, that's phase one. If you're the New York Football Giants, you say, well, we do like Thomas. And again, and if you're a real Giants fan, you watch this team down the stretch and you saw that Thomas was drastically better and improved than where he was at the start of the year. If you like Pert, you put Gates in that middle there, you like him. If you feel at least respectable about what you're going to get back from Shane Lemieux, then you already feel like you've done a lot of the heavy lifting there. Would you have liked a right guard? Of course you would have. But these are ones that you feel like you can afford to have a hole in that spot, a hole, quote unquote, as you go into this season. And who knows what maybe shakes out from other rosters making cuts here over training camp. The trick for me is going to be about that consistency. But I think even over what we expect from the offense is about the defensive side of the ball. And I wanted to, again, remember now, how much improvement can we see here versus what we need to see from the offense? Giving up 22 points per game was good for top 10 in points per game surrendered by the New York Football Giants defense last year, with one elite cornerback and basically a bunch of spare parts across the field from him. That's worth noting. It's worth noting that when you talk about yards per game in the passing attack, the Giants were very much middle of the road at nearly 238. So can that number get brought down a little bit? But probably they're going to live somewhere in there. I mean, listen, 238, even if you say you jump down to 225, that's when you start to get yourself into that top 12, top 10. Arizona, that's what Arizona surrendered this past season. Rushing wise, interestingly enough, that's where the Giants really breaded themselves at 111 per game, good for top 10 as well. So how do you continue to produce in that regard when you've lost Alvin Tomlinson? You may give up a little bit more. You may fall back into the middle of the pack and be a team like the Tennessee Titans that gave up middle of the road 120 per game in the rushing. But if you can shut down the passing game more effectively, all of a sudden that aids how you have to approach the running game. And guess what? You're far less likely to give up a home run in the running game for a touchdown than you are to surrender one through the air. So little tweaks and little changes that are going to need to be seen here from a stat standpoint in order to get this team where they want them to go. We'll touch back in here because my man Ricardo was talking about it on the New York Football Giants record from last season, because I was running through those kind of in real time. And credit to Ricardo. Threw it out there, right? The Bears, the Rams, the Cowboys, the Eagles, those were games. Those are 4 games right there. And when you're sitting here at 6-10, you think, very easily could have been 10-6. And even if you say you don't get every game that you could have or should have won, you don't automatically get them. Okay, give me 3 out of the 4. And now I'm sitting there at 9-7 as opposed to 6-10. I wonder what the new wrinkles defensively are going to mean for this team. And I wonder how long it will take for the offense to find its rhythm. I think that's the closing theme around this as we wait for the schedule later tonight. And maybe I'll come back on tonight and break it down in real time. If not, come back in here, check in tomorrow. I'm sure I'll do something. But if the offense needs the first 3 weeks of the season to kind of find its rhythm, find its stride, and the schedule breaks down unfavorably, where some weaker opponents line up earlier in the season when the Giants don't quite have their offensive rhythm yet, even if they go 2-1, right? Or even if they go 2-2 in their first 4 games, you feel like you should have won at least 3 out of 4. Now you've given yourself a baseline of 500, and then you'll go take on Kansas City and Tampa Bay later down the road. And even playing at your best, those are going to be difficult matchups to win. So I do wonder that. I wonder how long it takes for this offense to find the rhythm, how long it takes for a guy like Kadarius Toney to identify his role. What does Sterling Shepard look like? And then what is Darius Slayton's role? How do all these things shift? And it's good, right? You have almost too many weapons. Fantastic. But what is it going to look like for Daniel Jones settling in with all these new weapons and finding the rhythm, finding the new hierarchy? And when you have a guy like Jason Garrett at the helm, I have my concerns. I like that I have Joe Judge above him, making sure that things run smoothly, but it certainly does bring into question, right? How are we going to approach integrating all of these new weapons? I want to see what Saquon Barkley looks like. And you go back, I don't know if we mentioned this on the last episode or not, but the idea of not re-signing Wayne Gallman, I know, and no one's going to scoff at it, in the big picture. But remember, he went and signed with the 49ers, and behind a good offensive line, I think that's really what the takeaway was last year. Running wise, in the run game, the offensive line had things figured out. They were doing things very strong up front in front of Wayne Gallman. I don't think it was as much Wayne Gallman figuring things out as it was a young offensive line. So if you think about that in front of Saquon Barkley, if he's healthy, now you get dangerous. Now you get dynamic. Now everybody, you want to come crowd that box. Fantastic. Protect Daniel Jones for a handful of seconds. Let him drop back. And now look at the myriad of weapons that he can go to really punish you. And that's what it comes, punish them. When they come down into the box to stop Saquon Barkley, you have to be capable of punishing them through the air. It's going to draw back the defense, open things up for Saquon, and now you reset the table and you run it again. So, I mean, these are all the dynamics that we want to just go, yeah, green checkbox. And if you do, then I don't care when I look at this schedule, home or away, who cares? I'll tell you right now, when I run through it, we said it. Listen, Dallas and Washington are going to be tough matchups in the division. All division games are. But if I were to say, again, you want to go 4-2 in the division, that's how you start having a good season. Let's just run through them real quick here, though. Atlanta, very much a winnable game. Panthers, very winnable. Denver, very winnable. Raiders, winnable game. Rams, winnable game. Most of their home games are winnable contests. When you go on the road, I give you 5 right there, and you can even say take 2 home games in the division. I've already gotten you to 7 wins potentially. Not that you're going to run the table on your home field. But when you go on the road and you think about Kansas City, the Chargers, take the Chargers back out, but the Dolphins, the Buccaneers, right? Those are 3-4 automatic losses there. So, you're going to end up in that spot of, do you win that 17th game against Miami? Home-wise, when the Rams come to town, what does Matthew Stafford look like on this offense? How does that dynamic change? That is a shootout waiting to get lost potentially. So the roundabout way of getting to that spot where, even though we want to hang our hat on the defense, this offense is going to have the Raiders, the Falcons, the Rams, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Saints, the Buccaneers, even the Dallas games, right? 7 opponents, 8 total games where they need to light it up. They need to carry the line and allow the defense to make a couple of big dynamic plays along the way, cause some turnovers, and switch that field position. The offense is going to need to help set the tone, unlike last year, where the defense was trying to be the anchor of this team. You need the offense to come out, opening drives, put 7 on the board, 6, and let the defense have that sense of, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to be strong offensively. Now we get to pin our ears back and do what we do underneath Patrick Graham, right? But that has to be the starting point going into this season. That's going to dictate how this schedule looks. It's going to dictate what becomes more dangerous matchups. And every week that the Giants play better, more effectively offensively, every week that Daniel Jones looks better is a week that you're going to hear me say, okay, we can start to get more bullish about where we're heading over the course of this season. We will come back in and talk about the schedule officially, if not before, certainly on Friday morning. I don't know if Andy will be back. I haven't seen him. He's in Florida somewhere. We can't even find the guy. SOS. Send out a search party. But we'll come back in. We'll break down the schedule. We'll give our official predictions for what we think the record could look like. And that's, listen, a little bit of fluff, given that we haven't even seen the training camp from a lot of our young rookies. But it will be fun to break it down, try to set the table for what this season can look like for Big Blue. And of course, dive into any of the other news and notes around the roster as we hope to. Let's start getting into these training camps. Let's start to get a look at some of our young rookies this offseason. I need to get a taste of what these guys can do. I need to see how Daniel Jones makes his connection with Kadarius Toney, with Kenny Golladay, and really start to open up this very dynamic cabinet of weapons. You can follow the podcast wherever you get your needs fulfilled. Obviously here on YouTube, where I'm doing funny things with the mic. And of course on social media at One Giant Podcast. Until next time, friends, we will be back talking all things New York Football Giants. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand that you know, let's go Big Blue.